She was trapped in a world of silence and darkness. At just 19 months old, Helen Keller lost her sight and her hearing. For most, that would mean the end of hope. But for Helen, it was only the beginning of a miracle. With no voice, no words, and no way to understand the world around her, she was locked in a prison no one could see. Yet one day, a teacher entered her life, a teacher who would break the walls of silence and light the fire of knowledge inside her. From that moment, Helen Keller's journey became not just a fight for communication, but a story of courage that inspired the entire world. Helen Adams Keller was born on June 27, 1880, in the small town of Tuscumbia, Alabama. Her father, Arthur Keller, was a former soldier who had fought in the Civil War. Her mother, Kate Keller, was a young woman full of tenderness and hope. Baby Helen was healthy, active, and curious. Her first words, water and tea, brought joy to her parents. They believed she would grow up like any other child. But fate had other plans. When Helen was just 19 months old, a mysterious illness struck her. Some doctors called it scarlet fever, others brain fever. Whatever it was, it came with a high temperature, and after days of suffering, Helen survived, but the illness left her both blind and deaf. From that moment, the world changed. She could no longer see her mother's face. She could no longer hear her father's voice. The laughter of birds, the glow of sunlight, everything vanished into silence and darkness. At first, her parents didn't know what to do. They hoped she would recover. But as months passed, the truth became clear. Helen was trapped, cut off from the world around her. By the age of 6, Helen's frustration grew. She was intelligent, but with no way to express herself. When she wanted something, she pulled at people's hands. When she was angry, she screamed and kicked. Her family loved her dearly, but they watched helplessly as their little girl became wild and uncontrollable. To strangers, she seemed like a child lost forever. But inside Helen burned a powerful desire, a hunger to understand, to connect, to live. She just needed someone to unlock the door. By the time Helen was 6, her parents were desperate. They had visited doctors, listened to relatives, even tried local healers, but nothing could bring their daughter back to the world of light and sound. One evening, Helen's father read about a famous institution in Boston, the Perkins School for the Blind. It was known for training children who had lost their sight and for preparing teachers who could work with the most difficult cases. With hope in their hearts, Helen's parents wrote to the director of the school, Michael Anagnos, explaining their daughter's condition, a little girl blind, deaf, and lost in silence. Anagnos was deeply moved. He decided to send one of his best former students, a young woman named Anne Sullivan, who had once been half-blind herself. Anne had suffered in her childhood. Her father abandoned her, her mother died young, and she grew up in poverty. But through sheer determination, she graduated from Perkins as the top student. When Michael Anagnos asked her to teach Helen Keller, Anne accepted, knowing it would be the greatest challenge of her life. On March 3, 1887, Anne Sullivan arrived at the Keller home in Alabama. She was only 20 years old, yet she carried the strength of someone far older. At first, Helen resisted her. She was wild, untamed, and angry. She kicked, screamed, and pushed Anne away. But Anne was patient. She believed Helen could be reached. She began teaching her by spelling letters into her hand, DOLLCAKEMUG. Helen copied the signs, but to her, they were only meaningless movements. Her family wondered, was this truly possible? Could anyone break into the silence of their daughter's world? Anne refused to give up. She believed that one day a spark of understanding would light up Helen's mind. That spark was about to come, at a simple water pump. It was a warm spring day in April 1887. Anne Sullivan decided to try something new. She led Helen outside toward the old water pump in the yard. Helen felt the handle, and together they began to pump. Cold water gushed out, splashing over Helen's hands. As the cool stream ran across her skin, Anne quickly spelled into her palm, "W-A-T-E-R," again and again, "W-A-T-E-R." At first, Helen repeated the signs without meaning, but then something happened. Her body froze. Her hand tightened. A sudden realization sparked inside her. She dropped the mug she was holding, and with trembling fingers, she spelled the word back. W-A-T-E-R. In that instant, the invisible wall of silence and darkness cracked open. Helen understood. She realized that the strange hand movements stood for the rushing, living water on her hands. It was her first word, her first connection to the world. Excited, she touched the earth, and Anne spelled E-A-R-T-H. She touched the pump, and Anne spelled P-U-M-P. Helen's face lit up with joy. Her small world was finally expanding. That night, Helen could not sleep. She wanted to learn the name of everything around her, her toys, her family, her food, even the sky. For the first time, she felt she could reach out and truly touch life. Anne Sullivan had not just taught her a word, she had given her the key to language, the doorway to freedom. The miracle had begun. After the water pump breakthrough, Helen's world changed forever. She was no longer the wild child trapped in silence. She had discovered a key, and she wanted to unlock everything around her. Each day she ran to Anne with endless curiosity. She touched the grass, Anne spelled G-R-A-S-S. She held her mother's dress, Anne spelled D-R-E-S-S. Every object, every feeling, every thought became a chance to learn. Her hunger for knowledge was unstoppable. By the end of that day alone, Helen had learned 30 new words. Within weeks, she knew hundreds. Language had set her free. But Anne didn't stop at words. She introduced Helen to reading and writing. Using raised letters and braille, Helen traced words with her fingers. Soon she could read books, running her small hands across the pages and entering worlds of imagination. Anne also gave Helen a slate and special alphabet blocks, so she could write her thoughts. At first, her letters were shaky, uneven, but with practice, Helen began to express her feelings on paper, a miracle no one had thought possible. And then came the greatest challenge of all, speech. Helen wanted not just to understand the world, but to speak to it. With determination, she placed her fingers on people's lips and throats, studying how sounds were formed. It was painfully hard. Her words were not clear at first, and many struggled to understand her. But Helen never gave up. Her voice, though imperfect, became her bridge to others. By the time she was just 10 years old, Helen Keller, a girl once thought hopeless, was reading, writing, and speaking. And behind her, always, was the guiding hand of Anne Sullivan, her teacher, her friend, her miracle worker. Together, they were not just breaking barriers, they were rewriting history. Helen's thirst for knowledge could not be contained. She wanted more than words, more than books. She wanted an education like any other child. With Anne by her side, she began attending special schools. First, the Perkins School for the Blind in Boston, where her arrival amazed teachers and students alike. Here was a girl, once locked in silence, now reading, writing, and spelling with burning determination. Then she moved on to the Wright Humason School for the Deaf in New York, where she trained harder in speech and lip reading. Every day was a struggle, but Helen loved the challenge. She believed that education was her true freedom. Still, she dreamed of something greater, to attend a real college. In 1898, she began preparing for the toughest test of all, entrance exams for Radcliffe College, the women's branch of Harvard University. It was a dream no one thought possible for a deaf-blind girl. The exams were grueling. Anne spelled entire textbooks into Helen's hand, page by page, hour by hour, late into the night. Sometimes Anne's fingers bled from exhaustion, but she never stopped. At last in 1900, Helen Keller achieved the impossible. She entered Radcliffe College, becoming the first deaf-blind person in history to attend and graduate from a university. She studied literature, philosophy, history, and languages. She even learned French and German through touch. In 1904, she proudly received her Bachelor of Arts degree, a moment that stunned the world. Helen was no longer just a student. She was living proof that no barrier could silence the human spirit. And yet, her story was only beginning. Her dreams now stretched far beyond education. She wanted to use her voice, not just for herself, but for millions who lived in silence and darkness. With her degree in hand, Helen Keller stood at the doorway of a new life. She was no longer just a girl who had conquered her own silence. She was ready to speak for millions who could not be heard. In 1903, even before finishing college, she published her first book, The Story of My Life. It told the world about her struggles, her teacher Anne Sullivan, and her triumph over darkness. The book became an instant inspiration, translated into dozens of languages. But Helen's mission was greater than writing. She wanted to fight for those who had no voice, the blind, the deaf, the poor, the forgotten. She traveled across America, giving lectures, yes, lectures, delivered in her imperfect but determined voice. Crowds listened in awe. Here was a woman who could neither see nor hear, yet spoke with more clarity and courage than anyone. Helen met world leaders and great minds. She shook hands with Mark Twain, who admired her wit and spirit. She met Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, who supported her education. She even met American presidents, from Grover Cleveland to John F. Kennedy. But Helen's vision stretched far beyond America. She traveled to Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, spreading hope and awareness. Everywhere she went, she showed that blindness was not the end of life, but the beginning of courage. Through her speeches and books, Helen became a global icon, a symbol of human resilience. Yet behind her fame, one truth remained. She never walked this journey alone. Anne Sullivan, her beloved teacher and companion, was always by her side, spelling words into her hand, helping her navigate the world. Together, they proved that education and love could transform even the darkest life into light. As the years passed, Helen Keller's name spread across the world. She had become a symbol of courage and possibility. But even heroes must face sorrow. Her greatest strength, Anne Sullivan, the teacher who had given her language, freedom, and life, began to lose her health. Anne's eyes had always been weak, and by the 1930s, her vision faded completely. Illness drained her strength. Still, she insisted on staying by Helen's side. Even when she could no longer see, Anne continued to spell words into Helen's hand, as she had since that first day at the water pump. But on October 20th, 1936, Anne Sullivan passed away. For Helen, it was like losing the sun itself. She was devastated, but she did not allow grief to silence her mission. With the help of new companions, Helen continued her work. She traveled to more than 35 countries, meeting leaders, speaking to crowds, and raising support for the blind and disabled. During World War II, she visited wounded soldiers in hospitals, touching their faces, holding their hands, reminding them that life still had meaning. Nations honored her courage. She received awards, honorary degrees, and in 1964, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, America's highest civilian honor. Even in old age, Helen never stopped fighting for hope. She believed that blindness was not the greatest tragedy, but a poverty of vision in people's hearts. On June 1, 1968, at the age of 87, Helen Keller passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her funeral was simple, but her life was monumental. A little girl once trapped in silence and darkness had become a voice for the world. Her story reminds us that with patience, love, and courage, no barrier is too great, and no life is too small to shine a light. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and join us for more stories of history and courage.